Hello, everybody. Welcome back to High Ground. My name is Tanner, and today I'm joined by the top two opinion havers nationwide. We have Kbomb and we have Tom Foolery, and the audio could be slightly scuffed in this one. It is what it is. Wanted to get some other guys to give their opinions on some of the teams. The idea is we are going to give an overview of each team attending the Six Invitational 2025. 20 teams to talk about here, so just going to spend 2 minutes or so talking about each team. We'll give a little bit of background on each team and where we generally think they are as far as their expected performance. So favorites, these are teams that we could see winning the tournament pretty easily. We expect one of them probably to win the event. Tier 2, maybe one of these guys could pull it off, but even if they don't, we expect them to place pretty well. Top 6, top 8, around there. Tier 3 is solid, so teams that probably won't win the event, not as shocking as these two. These are the ones that, it still would be pretty surprising, but within the realm of possibility, and they'll probably fill up the middle positions in the bracket, 8 through 12, give or take, somewhere around there. 4, we have the wild cards, who they could make a solid run, but realistically, we don't have very high expectations for them. And then we have the rest, the teams that will very likely be grouped, or if they do make it out of their group, go out very early in the bracket. We're going to go bottom to top. We're going to start with Razza Company. If you're not familiar with the logos, I'll tell you what the team is as we start talking about it. Again, from the bottom here, Razza Company, technically Razza Company Academy, they won the South American Last Chance qualifier. All 4 of the teams at the bottom here came from regional Last Chance qualifiers, and the rest is by seeding from points. So BDS had the most points worldwide, and Talon had the 16th most. So, yeah, these guys, they were formerly known as E1. This is, I believe, 3/5 of the roster that went to the Manchester Major. They got dead last in Swiss. They went 0-3, so not great. But they did qualify. They qualified here. They have a couple new players. And so, K-Bomb, what do you think about Razza Company?
Okay, so I have Razza Company as a tier 4 wildcard team.
Any reasoning in particular?
Well, I mean, number one, they're a Brazilian team. All the Brazilian teams, typically are pretty good. I mean, they're not like one of the big name Brazilian teams, but I could definitely still see them taking down some teams. I mean, if they put it together, I know they've had some really good stages in Brazil. If they're able to put it together on land, they could be a really solid team. But they haven't proven anything on land at least, so that's where I have them right now.
Yeah, a lot to prove. Stage 1, they went, I think, 4-5 in best of ones, not great, but then they did qualify as the second seed going into Manchester. Then stage 2, they were pretty good in best of ones, and then they didn't qualify for the major. So some good performance in best of ones, some best of threes. This will all be best of threes, the event in its entirety. Tom, what do you think about these guys?
I think you brought up a great point there. This team really has struggled with best of threes. And because of that, I think they're going to have a really hard time in groups where this entire event is going to be best of threes. Personally, I have to put them in tier 5. I don't enjoy doing that. I think K-Bone makes a great point that Brazilian teams are generally pretty strong. But I think this team has less experience than a lot of the other teams in this group. I think they have a good chance of falling off, which kind of stinks. Like, Baseto is a pretty fantastic support player. I've really enjoyed watching Perez and STK frag out. I just don't see them getting very far this event, unfortunately.
Okay, I'm gonna vote for wildcard for now. I think we'll see how things develop. Who's in 3 and who's in 5. I could see them going down. I don't think I would imagine them anywhere but 4 or 5. But again, they are from probably the strongest region, even if Brazil hasn't been quite as dominant this year. So I think just by way of making it through, I think they have an okay chance to at least make them upsets. Again, I don't expect them to go super far, but I think they could be a bit better than people are giving them credit. So let's put them in 4 for now, and then maybe we'll reevaluate a little bit down the line. Next up, we have Oxygen from North America coming in as, I think they're the 6th North American team, and sort of lucky for them that the other 5 had already qualified via points, because if SSG or DarkZero or one of those guys hadn't made it through via points, they would have been the heavy favorite to make it through the LCQ. But because all those guys had qualified, it felt like it was really between Wildcard and Oxygen. That's what happened. They both made it to the grand final. Wildcard felt like the favorite. They'd had Oxygen's number as of late, but in the one that truly mattered, the qualification match, it was Oxygen that got across the line. This is the first time this org will go to an international event in quite some time. I think SI 2023 might have been the last time. So in straight up 2 years. They have a decent amount of talent on the roster. Gomez and Diaz and Yaga and Newers are all pretty experienced players. Hat has shown some promise, and I think this is his debut event. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think too many people are thinking very highly of Auction right now. What do you think, Tom?
I'm one of those. I think actually I really like the core that came over from M80, which was the Gomez, Diaz, and Yaga trio. But I've been a little bit of a hater of Noors for a little while. He's got a phenomenal talent, but it hasn't resulted in much, at least not lately. And I also tend to think Hat is overrated. They're in my tier 5. They're also in a relatively tough group. I don't expect them to make it out of groups, period. But we'll get more into that in the next video.
Yeah, I am excited to see Newers finally back on the stage. It's been quite some time. He was back in like 2023, probably regarded as one of the better fraggers in the world when the supporting cast around him was very different. And I was also really excited when I saw this team form. I thought that they would be a lot better than they've turned out to be. What do you think, Kbomb?
Yeah, this one has me really split on where to put them, but I think I do want to put them in tier 5. I think I'm like super excited to see Newers on LAN, and I think the talent of the team could be really good. I just think they need to figure out the roles really. Like I don't think Hat was in the right role a lot. But I mean the LCQ, they didn't look too good. They lost the wild card a couple times, but I think they ended up beating them in the match that mattered. I mean, maybe on LAN they'll be a better team, but I think they just have to be in tier 5. Being like the 7th or 8th place team in NA, so that's pretty low from a region that's like not performed the greatest.
Yeah, stage 1,
Top to
they did pretty well during the regular stage and then didn't manage to qualify for the major. Stage 2, they didn't do that well and then obviously also didn't qualify. So they've shown a little bit of something, but yeah, I also don't have the highest of hopes. I think they're a little bit of a sleeper. I think people are really, really low on these guys. I think they could show up a bit more than the community expects, but yeah, I think realistically they're probably one of the teams that belongs in tier 5 until proven otherwise.
And I think the biggest reason for that is we haven't seen them play together very much outside of the LCQs. This is a pretty new roster as far as all 5 players together. There's really not a lot that we can expect, but we'll see.
Yeah, they're certainly one of the ones I'll be keeping my eye on at the very least with morbid curiosity. We'll see how they perform. Next up, we have CAG Cyclops Athlete Gaming. These guys are historically one of the more fun teams to watch, both their gameplay and their energy outside the server. I think the gameplay has fallen off a little bit. I think are a little bit more standard than they used to be. They used to be really, really wacky. They've shown I don't know, I guess a little bit of a glimmer in that at the very least they made it out of groups in Manchester and didn't do especially well. But then they went like 1-2 in Montreal. I think they only beat CL4L if I remember right. They didn't make it out of, I guess not. Yeah, it is. What is the first? It's called like play-ins or something. I don't know what people are still referring to as the group phase, group stage. So I think they're probably one of the worst teams at the event. I don't have too much more to say except for, I'm excited to see these guys hollering about outside the server, win or lose as they tend to do. What do you think, Kbomb?
Yeah, I've got them as a tier 5 team. I think they do the same thing at every event. They win 1 or 2 big games and then they go home, and that seems like what's gonna happen probably again. If I had to guess.
Yeah, and we're not talking about the groups yet, but they do have a very tough group to contend with.
Yeah.
So. How about you, Tom?
Not a whole lot to add. These guys are so much fun to watch, though. Anaton on Shields is always just so much fun to watch. And, actually, Cyclops really have been in the best form that I've seen them in several years. It's just unfortunate that they're in a tough group and I don't see them making it out.
Yeah, what
that's
could have
a
been
tier 5 for me.
What could have been if only they won the tiebreaker against Team 1 way back in Mexico? How the butterfly wings could have flapped. Next up, we have G2, perhaps the team from the LCQs that people will put the most faith in, because time and time again, Alamau's G2, Doki's G2 has really been underrated. People weren't expecting very much of them coming into events, and then they either placed very well. They even won Six Invitational 2023. And here we are at another SI. Last year they didn't win it, but they still placed top 4. So that's back-to-back really good performances at Six Invitationals. A couple different players. Benja Masters now over here on SSG. Virtue's now over on Secret. So all of that G2 roster is actually in attendance, just not all on the same team. They have Blaz and Loira now, who, I don't know, there were sort of mixed opinions when they came in, and I think they've still had a mixed performance. They at least qualified for Montreal. They did very poorly, but at least they were there, and they qualified for this one. I think they're another one kind of like Oxygen that people might be a little bit too down on, especially with the number of times they've been underrated and defied those expectations. So I think, well, I'll pass it to you guys before I deal out the judgment. What do you think, Tom?
I can jump in. Yeah, I'll say that they are the definition of a wild card. As far as I'm concerned, they've really struggled to get it together since they've made their recent roster changes. You know, they have been the opposite of consistency as far as I'm concerned. But G2 has been known to make incredible runs at international events. They have plenty of experience on their roster. They could get grouped or they could make it to the main stage. It really could go either way. So de facto tier 4 for me.
Yeah, and I feel like they have one of the more volatile groups. Like several teams in there I could see being pretty good or pretty bad. So what do you think about them, Kbomb?
I definitely think like on name they're a wild card, but I think just because of the success that the players have had on the roster in the past makes me want to put them in the tier above of a team like Razza who hasn't done anything really. So I mean, I think they should be tier 3 in my opinion, because I think it's a solid roster. We've seen Alamo, we've seen Doki, we've seen them win SI before, and we've seen them place top 4, as you were saying last year. So I mean, yes, wildcard fits them really well, but in terms of the tiers, I would put them in tier 3.
That's fair. You've almost convinced me. I think I'll put them in 4 here, and then again, just like some of these other teams, we'll reconsider a bit at the end. I was definitely thinking 4 coming in, but having said that, I could maybe see them going into 3. I do think it really, really hurts them, the fact that they were so bad at the last event, and also the event before that. But then they changed up the roster.
They were 15th, 16th in Montreal and 19th and 20th in Manchester.
Yeah, pretty damning performances, but you know, it's the big show. They could turn up big this time. Again, we'll revisit them. Next up, we have PSG Talon, a team from South Korea with a very famous coach, Fabian, one of the most storied players in the entire game. Storied player and coach now, having won Six Invitational 2023 as the coach of G2, won SI, it must have been 2018 and 2019 on Penta and then G2. So, you know, crazy famous coach. And the team doesn't quite live up to that fame. They were starting to make a name for themselves a year or so ago. They had or was it at Manchester they had the good run, or was it the major before that? Do you guys remember?
I believe it was Manchester.
Yeah,
it was this year for sure.
Okay, and when they
beat BDS.
Yeah, they beat BDS.
Yeah.
So they were pretty good at Manchester, and did they qualify for? I feel like this is one of the teams I have a little bit of a blind spot on. I forgot to look this up. Did they qualify for Montreal? I'm going to continue talking if one of you guys wouldn't mind looking that up really quick. Anyways, they really fell off after their kind of breakout performance, where people thought, man, this could be potentially the best APAC team. You know, up there with likes of Bliss and Bleed, and it's dubious once again because of what have happened to some of those teams. But I don't have the highest hope for these guys. Maybe if this event were right after their really strong major performance, I would. But having seen what we have recently, I don't have the highest hope. So what do you think, Kbomb?
Yeah, I think they're a tier 5 team. I think the fact that Fabian is their coach does, you know, add a little bit of spice to it, but they really haven't proven anything. They had one that Swiss stage where they beat BDS, I think, and that was really their only big win. I think they actually beat. Did they beat E1 in that Swiss stage too? I think those were the two.
I believe so.
Those
they
were
placed
the 2 teams.
9th through 11th in Manchester and failed to qualify for Montreal.
Okay.
Yeah, so they've had some good wins, but even that is just not. It's not like a great overall. I mean, maybe for them it's a great event, but like you wouldn't say for just an average team that's a great event. Getting, you know, not even making it to main stage. So I think that I think they're a tier 5 team.
Yeah, I think I can agree. Where do you think they place, Tom?
So I think ultimately they're probably going to end up getting put in tier 5, but I actually may push for them to be tier 4. And the reason being is since we last saw them on the international stage, they've added Yas and Gaudi. Yas being the star fragger from D plus for several years, and Gaudi an up and coming talent, one that I'm honestly not that familiar with, but I know a lot of people in APAC or that are APAC fans are very excited about seeing them play. Um, I think part of the problem with Talon in the past has been they just haven't had any like star players. They haven't had any ridiculous fraggers. Adding Yas to the team, I think, could help them to break out of groups and maybe make a run, upset some big teams again. So I have some faith in Fabian. I would put them in tier 4 if it were my choice, but it sounds like they're going in 5.
Yeah, they have made some exciting changes as of late. I think let's go 5 initially. Again, we'll reconsider because I do think they do sort of fit the definition of a wild card in some senses. Yeah, it's a tough call. Let's move on to Team Joel, formerly known as Bleed, no longer representing that organization for reasons that we're not going to go into. And they made a roster change. They brought Noodle on, so they now have Leader and Noodle. Noodle sort of a bit of a claim to fame when he played on GK, made top 8 in Atlanta, I think. Had a pretty solid run with that team, and maybe they can replicate that here. Although Bleed is no stranger to being in and around top 8s. I don't have the highest. I don't know. I do think that they are a solid team. Maybe I'm downplaying them a little bit too much. I feel like the tumultuousness of the roster changes and the whole org situation is probably going to weigh heavy on their minds. Maybe that's affected my opinion of them a little bit too much. But what do you guys think? Do you think this is still reminiscent of the Bleed of not too terribly long ago? What do you think, Tom?
So I will say, Bleed is or X Bleed now Team Joel is far and away my favorite APAC team of all time. I think the roster changes were positive. Asfi and Turd were both great players, but they weren't performing particularly well for Bleed internationally. Adding on Leader and Noodle, those two players we've seen plug into other teams and immediately add value. Where so most of the time when I say, "Oh, recent roster changes, we don't know what's going to happen," these two players I know we can put into any system and they'll find success. That being said, I still rate them at a wild card team. I don't think they're quite strong enough to be rated solid. I think they could make a really good run, but there's also a danger that they don't quite pull it together.
Do you agree, Kbomb? Think they're a wild card?
Yeah, I have them as a wild card team. I think, yeah, I think they're, I think Leader and Noodle bringing them in, and then with Mentalist too, I think they're a very good. They could have a very good mindset. Like I know you said they may be down a little bit, but honestly, I think they'll come in with nothing to lose. With I think they got good mental players on their team, and if they come in like that, they could be a dangerous team. But just expectation wise, I mean, APAC hasn't done extremely well. I do think they're probably the best APAC team coming into event, in my opinion, even with the recent roster changes, but I'd still put them as a wild card team.
Yeah, I think I probably agree. They're likely still the best APAC team. They have had some struggles lately, not just the org and roster changes, but they just haven't performed nearly as well. It felt like they had sort of a stranglehold on their region not too long ago, and as of late, it's felt a lot closer. And so again, probably the best APAC team, but there's just so much uncertainty that it's hard to tell. I think they do fit the bill for a wild card, but I think they could pretty quickly establish themselves as looking more like a solid team once we actually get to see them in the server. So next up we have SCARZ, another APAC team. These guys from Japan. They've had some highs, they've had some lows. They've mostly been pretty mediocre, but they do have at least one top 8 under their belt. They were pretty lukewarm the last major. I thought they would be a bit better. SCARZ or Nina and Rek rather are I still think a really powerful fragging duo, even if they didn't quite show up in the way that I and other people expected. But we've seen both of them on different teams at different times show up like insanely, like best player in the entire tournament, at least by the raw numbers. But again, they haven't quite lived up to the impact they could bring. What do you think, Kbomb?
Yeah, I think that you make a convincing case that those two guys are very strong players, but we haven't seen anything since that top 8, and even in that top 8, they had a relatively easy Swiss stage schedule. I just don't really think they've shown enough on LAN to be put above tier 5. Yeah, I don't see them in the same caliber as those other 3 wildcard teams, and I see them on a much similar level as teams like Cyclops, Oxygen, and Talon. So I'd put them in T5 for sure.
Yeah, you think they're a tier 5 team, Tom?
I have a hard time putting them in tier 5, partly because they have been a dominant force in Japan for as long as they've been together. They've been first seed in that region for the last several years running. But also, they have made deep runs before. They've made it to top 8. I'd like to see them make it farther this year. It's going to be a tough event for them, but I do see them at least making it out of groups. I would put them in tier 4, but we'll see.
I think I want to go tier 5. I don't have the highest hopes for them either. Like having a stranglehold on Japan, that it's kind of whatever. Like in a sense, it's impressive, but it's also one of the weakest regions. You know, the best teams in Japan don't even hold a candle to the like 3rd, 4th, 5th, or whatever best from Europe, Brazil, North America. Maybe some stages they do, but generally speaking, just Japan is just easily one of the worst regions. They're beating up on Cyclops, and like I can't even name another team from Japan. So like I just don't think it's terribly impressive to be the overlords of a sort of weak region. These are like 20 of the very best teams in the entire world, so I don't think regional dominance is quite enough. I could see them performing better than I expect, but you know, I just don't expect a ton. Next up, we have Shopify Rebellion, formerly the Sonics. Of course, they made some roster changes coming into stage number 2, but they haven't made any roster changes. So they still have Canadian Surf in addition to the other Sonics players that those guys joined in with. And I feel like now we're kind of getting into the more solid teams. It was unclear what was going to happen as far as orgs for a lot of these teams, but at least Sonics was able to hook up with a decent org, unlike the likes of Unwanted, Joel. Unfortunate circumstance for them, but yeah, I think they're coming in as maybe not one of the absolute favorites for the event, but probably one of the teams to watch. Having Canadian on the team, and they were still, I think, at the very least, one of the more impressive performers in Montreal. What do you think, Tom?
So in preparing for this recording, I actually had them in tier 3 as a solid team, but the more I think about it, really, I think they deserve to be in tier 2. I think Rexen and Grixer are one of the strongest fragging duos in North America, probably since Fultz and
Rampy.
God, I'm blanking on the name Rampy. Thank you. Way back in the day on SSG, the two of them play together really well, and you just can't bet against Canadian in a North American LAN. If they make it to the stage, they have a really good chance of making it all the way. Again, they're in a tough group, so it might be difficult for them to make it there or place well, but we'll see about that. I think they have a very strong chance of making it far.
Yeah, in Montreal, they had a really solid run. Well, they started off a little bit rocky. They lost their best of ones, but then backs against the wall, they clean swept their way in all of their best of 3s into top 8, and then they sort of faltered once they got there. But they did make top 8. That's an achievement, and they were very impressive in doing so. The team is even more experienced now as a 5 stack, and yeah, I think they'll be pretty good. Do you think they're a very strong team, Kbomb?
Yeah, I have him in tier 2. I think I really like the development that Ambi has had. He's becoming a really start entry player along with Rexen. Those two are really powerful like entry fraggers. And then with Canadian, you can never count a Canadian team out. So yeah, I think they're definitely a tier 2 team in my opinion.
That's a good call out on Ambi. It's been a year since his debut. His first event with Sonics in T1 was at SI 2024, and they did pretty well. They made, I think, top 6 if I remember right, and they got kind of crushed in their final game. Ambi was talking a little bit of snack as you do. I mean, they're bringing you up to say whatever, but it was so funny. He's like, we're gonna beat these guys, and then he got absolutely smoked. But Yeah, he's been pretty good for pretty much the whole year, and let's see what he does on his 1 year anniversary event. Next up, we have Furia, the reigning world champions. Of course, not the organization. They were W7M when they won, but they're now on Furia. Since they've left W7M, they've been notably much less impressive, but the bar was so high that was inevitable that it would happen at some point. They won a major into an SI, and they still made like top 8 at everything. I'll double check that in a second. They still performed pretty well at all the events this year, even if they didn't win them like they had been doing. So, do we think Furia has a chance at the SI repeat? What do you think, Kbomb?
They definitely have a chance. This roster, yeah, they 100% have a chance. However, I do not think they're going into it as a favorite. And I think I have my my tier 1 as 3 really strong teams that I think stand above the rest. So I think Furia, in my opinion, falls to a tier 2 team. But they could very easily jump up to tier 1 if they perform really well in groups, because we've seen what this team can do, and their prime is probably the best prime of any team ever in R6, and it's the same roster. So even though they've had a few bad compared to their standards events, they could still be a very, very dangerous team in SI.
Yeah, what do you think, Tom?
I think I'd agree. It's hard to bet against. It's a roster that has won 3 consecutive international events, but they haven't been nearly as dominant this year. Not to say they've been weak. I think they pretty firmly belong in that tier 2 spot. They are going to be formidable, whoever decides to go head to head with them. And we'll see what happens. But this roster has been incredibly talented and just has accomplished so much.
And yeah, correction. They did not make it to the last major. They lost out in, I think it was the final of the LCQ to Black Dragon. So a little bit of stain on their reputation. That was the first event that they missed in like forever. But still, top 8, I think, in Manchester, top 4 in Esports World Cup, and then now they had a little bit of a break and they're coming back to retain their crown. Yeah, I think pretty clearly they belong in 2. Like you guys said, they're not one of the absolute favorites, but they can't be any lower than very strong here. And next up,
I'm glad you mentioned that. Sorry,
Oh,
realistically, I think they have a bone to pick after missing out on the last major.
Yeah.
They probably feel like they deserve that spot. For whatever reason, they slipped, but I think they realized, hey, we've got to work on ourselves. We've got to improve. We've got to make sure this never happens again. So I fully expect them to make a recovery and be back in that top 8.
Yeah, it's been a very long time since we've seen these guys with that sort of fire lit under them, where they missed out on an event and now they need to reprove themselves at the next one. And next up we have M80, and these guys are coming in with a few roster changes. They were reasonable last stage. They made it to top 8. Am I making that? They were definitely top 8 in Manchester, and coming in with a few roster changes, picking up perhaps, probably most people would say the 2 best players off of Beast Coast, Cloud9/Beast Coast. They picked up Gunner, they picked up Diffuser, they picked up Packer from CL4L, the T2 team that managed to qualify for the last major, and they retained Spoit and Kino. So I think most people are expecting them to be pretty strong, but just picking up one not brand new player. Packer does have some T1 experience, but there is a bit of a gap between now and the last time he played in T1. And then, although you are bringing in 2 impressive players, no guarantee that they'll be excellent in another environment. We saw Gunner be so mediocre on Sonics for so long. We've never seen Diffuser on another T1 team. So a lot for this team to prove, but they do on paper look like a very stacked roster. What do you think, Tom?
Man, I think you really hit the nail on the head, specifically with Gunner. About 6 months ago, I made a prediction that M80 or another fairly well-off roster was going to try and buy out Gunner's contract after he won the Manchester major. And I'm in the camp that event may have been not necessarily a fluke. I think everyone who was on that Cloud9 roster at the time is incredibly talented, and they absolutely deserved the win. They didn't skip their way there or anything. They didn't have an easy schedule. They made it work, and they even beat BDS in the way. But Yeah, this is a lot of changes for the M80 roster. Not a whole lot staying consistent. We haven't seen them playing together a whole lot. And for me, the biggest thing that brings them down from tier 2 into tier 3 is they brought back Bodega again as their coach. And they've tried him over and over and over again. He has not been able to lead this roster to significant success, as in like a main stage finish for this team. So, or at least not in recent history. So I'm putting them firmly in tier 3.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I saw somebody in the comments the other day. They were like really happy that Bodega came back. I felt like most people think, man, why are they bringing this guy back? I don't. I feel like Bodega doesn't have too many diehard fans at this point, but I don't know. He's a funny guy. I remember back at SI, I think it was like 2021 maybe. He was coaching MIBR and he was just absolutely like screaming at the other team. It was fun to watch. So I've been a little bit of a Bodega fan since then. And slight correction, yeah, they weren't at the last major. I was definitely thinking of Manchester when they made the top 8, missed out on the last major, and coming back with a new look. What do you think about them, Kbomb?
I think I have them going into this video. I had them as a tier 2 team, but the way the list is looking right now with G2 and tier 4, I think maybe I would put them. They're either a top tier 3 or a bottom tier 2 team, in my opinion, going into it, just because Gunner and Diffuser were two of the best players on a major winning team this year. And then I think Packer honestly is really good pickup because CL4L, they beat some good teams in the LCQ for the last major, right? They beat some solid teams from NA. They had to get a sub, which didn't help their performance, but I think he's been one of the best players on that team and really propelled them forward over some other good teams. So I think that's a good pickup for M80. And then Spoit and Gunner as an entry duo, that could be lethal. Like on paper, that could be the best entry duo in the whole tournament on paper, but we haven't seen this team play together. So that being said, I think they're more of a top tier 3 team the way this tier list is looking.
Yeah, I feel like just by the strength of the players they have on their team, even if we haven't seen them play, they got to be above 4. But because there's so much uncertain, I could honestly seeing this team being another M80 flop. We'll have to see. I think tier 3 is definitely where they belong as of now.
If it wasn't M80, a team that we've seen put together super team after super team and fail every time, maybe we would be talking about them a little bit differently. But we've seen M80 try this over and over again, and they always fail. So
I've got to applaud him a little bit for picking up Packer. This is the first player that's not extremely proven that they picked up. Like they got the XSET roster, but which had Spirits, Yaga, Diaz, Gomez, Kino way back when. That was fine. And then they brought in Iconic, they brought in Spoit. Those were both superstars at the time. Iconic, I'm hoping he makes his return one of these days. But they've just, and Citizen and Cameraman, they've just brought in player after player that's just like borderline legendary players, if at least not super proven players. But finally, they bring in the likes of Packer, who again has a little bit of tier 1 experience, but is a very unproven player. I'm excited to see what they can do. Not bringing in just arguably stale players, you know what I'm saying? So I'm excited to see the new look M80 for sure. Then we have Falcons, and I'm really curious to see what you guys think about them, because they were really strong looking in Montreal. They made it all the way to the top 8. Yeah, it was top 8. They lost to Virtus.pro. That wasn't top 4, right? It was top 8. Yeah, I'm pretty positive. Anyways, they made it all the way to top 8. They like tore their way through phase 1 and phase 2. Robbie looked absolutely unstoppable for most of the event. The team just looked crazy. Like I wonder if they'll cool off a little bit. Was that just a little bit of a Cinderella, to an extent? Probably it was a Cinderella run, but was it a fluke, or do we think we'll see something kind of similar from them here? Because it was really impressive. What do you think, Kbomb?
Yeah, I have them as a tier 4 team. I think they're a wild card team for sure. I think they played really well in the last event, but I don't know. I don't know how much better they can get than that. Like I don't know if they have a ton of room, a ton of potential to grow into. I think if they play at the same form they did last event, they could go pretty far, but I don't see them being like I don't see them making past top 8 even if they play like really good. So that's why I have them as a tier 4 team.
Yeah.
I don't think I don't think they have the potential to join a tier with like M80.
Yeah, we'll see. You know, potential's a difficult thing to talk about. They made top 8
True.
there, but top 8 here at SI is a little bit of a different ball game. The competition is in theory a little bit fiercer. That was just a major. This is now the World Championship. I think 4 is probably reasonable for them. They're another team that if they show up big in their first game, if they sort of keep that form from most of the last major, I could see them being higher up than we put them. But how do you feel about it, Tom?
Lost my mute button. Sorry. So again, in preparing, I think I put them in a tier 4, but realistically, I think we could probably push them up to a solid tier 3 team. Like you were saying, I think Falcons have made top 8 in the most recent major. They also made top 8 in the Atlanta major, or is that GK? Point
GK,
being
right?
though, a MENA team has made the top 8 in almost every major, I want to say. Not the Invitational, but almost every major for the last 2 years since the region has been introduced. Um, they feel like a wild card team in the sense that you don't really know what to expect with them. They are relatively unpredictable when you watch them play, but their performances are almost always solid. I think they could be pushed up to a tier 3.
Yeah, we'll again see how it develops for them, and because I do think that they fit the definition of wild card very, very well. They did have a very quote unquote solid performance in the last major, but that's just one major with this team. You know, they had some change coming into it. I feel like it's not long enough of a tenure. Like they haven't established themselves enough of a roster for that to be enough evidence to put them in tier 3 just yet. I think I'm more comfortable in tier 4, but again, we'll see if some of these guys happen to go into tier 4. Maybe some will be moving up or down. Next up, we have Virtus.pro. These guys were, they were pretty excellent at the last major, and they were even more excellent at the last Six Invitational. They made it all the way to top 3 of SI 2024. They were the highest placing non-Brazilian team. We're getting some bleed through on your mic, Tom.
Oops.
Good. Yeah, they're a team that almost always shows up when they go to land. They had a few blemishes in that last year. I don't know, not too long ago. They had some majors where they only made it to, they didn't quite make it in the top 8. They fell in the final round of Swiss, but that's still pretty reasonable. You know, making it to the last round of Swiss is nothing to sneeze at, but relative to some of this roster's other performances, it is a little bit less impressive. But again, they are coming off a top 4 at the most recent event. So in a sense, they are undoubtedly one of the favorites, maybe not by the standard of this tier list. Let's see what you guys think. Do you guys think that they are actually a tier 1, 2, 3, probably around there, but what do you think, Tom?
I think they might be a tier 3. And I love this roster. VP have been so much fun to watch. Ever since they were Empire, they have been a force to be reckoned with. But what puts me, even though they had a top 4, if not top 3 performance at the last invite, what puts them in this solid tier for me is their map pool. It's been a glaring weakness for the roster for the last several years. It is something that they've slowly started to work on. We started to get hints of, some new strategies from them, I believe on Consonant at the last event. But unless they can add 1 or 2 maps to their solid repertoire, or their very strong repertoire, I should say, I have to put them in tier 3.
What do you think, Kbomb?
Yeah, I hate agreeing with Tom, but I do agree. I think they're a tier 3 team.
Really?
I think they have the potential, like if they can get rolling to really be good, but I think the map pool has been an issue. I think they didn't make the first major this year, right? And
Yeah, and they also missed out on Esports World Cup.
yeah, and then they made the last major by what I would say by they played G2, I'm pretty sure, and G2 blundered in the map pick and took them to maybe like Cafe or something. I don't know. I just remember everyone was like, why would G2 do that? And VP ended up winning that game and making the major. That being said, they played really good at the major, and every time they get on land, they seem to be really good. But I just haven't seen them. I don't know. I have them as a tier 3 team right
Well,
now.
the game they played against G2, it's not like that was the grand final of the LCQ because they came in as the third seed. G2 also did make it to the event, but
Yeah.
yeah, like you're saying, they did definitely.
Okay.
G2 has had some fumbles as of late.
They were the 6th seed, weren't they? They were and G2 was the 3 seed or something like that in
Coming
the
into
European playoffs. Maybe in the European
it could
playoffs
be.
that year. I just remember them like I don't
Yeah,
think they had a good
you're right.
stage. But then they
Yeah, they
ended
were.
up they ended up beating G2 though, and then when you get top 4, all you have to do is win one more series, which they beat. I don't know who they beat, but they made the major, and once they get to the major, they do good, and they are here, so maybe they will end up being good. But
Yeah, they beat G2 immediately in the playoffs, and then they lost the secret, but they beat Wolves to qualify.
okay, so yeah,
All right, I would be inclined, I think, to put them in tier 2, but if both of you guys are going to say tier 3, I guess I have to default to that. They're a team that usually, more often than not, will put in a really solid performance on land. They were top 4 at the last event, but if you do zoom out a little bit over the last few years, yeah, some really impressive performances, but a few slightly less impressive, either at the event or just not making it to the event. So maybe they do average out to solid. Okay, moving on to SpaceStation. Actually, they're in the same group, but not really in the purview of the conversation. My favorite team, let it be known, and Virtus.pro, they're probably my favorite European team. But anyways, neither here nor there. SSG, I think one of the more consistently good teams from NA. Maybe they haven't been number one any given stage for quite some time. There's usually another team taking that spot, but they're almost always going to the events. They're putting in really solid performances against really good teams like FaZe and W7M being just a round or two away from clinching a series, but then unfortunately fumbling it. So it feels like they just need to unlock one last chakra or something in order to make a really crazy run in an event. But do we think this will be the one? What do you think, Kbomb?
I have SSG as a tier 2 team, and that may be higher than you guys think, but I think with Benja being on this roster, I think he's fit well, and I think they haven't been together for a super long time, but I think this is an event where they can finally come together. Maybe a little bit of a prediction, but I think they're going to be a pretty deadly team at this event. So I have them as a tier 2 team. That's just the way I look at them. I mean, but I don't know how much I favor them over the tier 3 teams, but I have them as a tier 2 team right now.
Yeah, and they were pretty reasonable last SI. They topped their group, and funnily enough, last SI no Brazilian teams actually topped their group, but they topped the group of the likes of FaZe and Wolves, Bliss, D+, and they made it all the way to top 8 in bracket. They lost to DarkZero, and ultimately they were eliminated by W7M, who of course went on to win the event. So what are you thinking? What are they going to do this time around, Tom?
I also have them in tier 2. I think Kbomb's right on the money. I almost thought Kbomb would put them as a tier 1 just because of how much of a North America stan I know he is. But this roster is incredibly talented. They've made it to the top tiers of play before, and I think they have a very strong chance of making out of groups. I think the very first part of the bracket could be a challenge for them. But if they make it to the main stage, I see them riding the energy of the crowd that will be a North American crowd, taking that home team advantage, very much like we saw the Brazilian teams take that advantage in SI last year, and potentially going all the way. They just have to make it to main stage first. And that can sometimes be a challenge for them if their mental falls off early. This team is a very mental focused team. If they're not in that, mindset, if they don't feel like they're dominating the lobby, they won't dominate. Yeah, but I should say my.
Yeah, I think they haven't performed well at SI in several years, if I remember right. They're usually just around like top 8 to top 12, which is still pretty reasonable. It's not terrible, but SSG back in 2020, they won the Invitational, and actually in Montreal they also lost to W7M, not the same team. This is after old W7M went to Furia, but in Montreal the team they were eliminated by was once again W7M, who once again went on to win the event. So maybe there's some secret to beating SSG eliminating them at 8th place to go on to win the event. But yeah, I think tier 2 is reasonable. There's no way you can put them as one of the event favorites. I could see them putting in a solid run, but I do think it would be like pretty miraculous to see the guys in like the grand final. I would love it. Like I'll be rooting for these guys all the time. But tier 2 is probably where they belong. I could even maybe see an argument for tier 3, but I'm happy enough with them in tier 2. Next up, we have one of SpaceStation's longtime rivals. We have DarkZero, who they beat them. DarkZero beat SpaceStation at the last SI, but the most recent major, Montreal, SpaceStation defeated DarkZero, sending them home, if I remember right. I think that was the last game. Yeah, sending them home at 1-3. SSG went on to make it to the playoffs. So DarkZero, they had a really poor last major. A lot of people thought that they were going to be one of the better teams in Swiss. They would go on to top 8, maybe even like a top 4 kind of finish, but they got crushed. Again, they lost SSG. They beat D+, D+, one of the worst teams at the event. They lost to Elevate. They lost to Falcons. So some pretty tough losses across the board. They didn't lose to any of the top teams at the event. But I think a lot of people are going to be really low on them because of that poor performance. But I just feel like they have to bounce back. They have to be better than that. Do you guys think so? What do you think, Tom?
So I think I have to put this team as a solid tier 3. And that sounds a little crazy. As I know DarkZero has had really incredible performances in the past. Their roster is incredibly talented. NJR and Panda are a really phenomenal duo. Nafe has done a really good job of leading this team in IGLing since Canadian has left. And but can't really bet against Bolo a lot of times. But one thing that I think a lot of people might be missing is that their coach, Mint, was recently signed to another team. And that could have a much bigger factor than some people might let on. Mint has been the coach of this roster for, I want to say, the last 4 years, if not 5. And that was just before he was a player. I have to wonder how their new coach might handle strats. I don't know if Nafe has a lot of strategies in back pocket, the same way Canadian might when Canadian leads a team to victory in the way that he does. It's very possible that DZ doesn't put up as strong of a performance as many people think. And I'm just going to bump them down to tier 3 as a result.
I mean, I feel like they can't go above tier 3 with how poor they were in Montreal. And we'll have to see how big the Nafe impact is. I've heard a lot of people say that he wasn't that influential in terms of strategy and whatnot while Canadian was on the team. And then there was last stage where there was an overlap of having Mint but not Canadian, and now neither are on the team. They got Kangaroo Kenny, the former coach of ITV, sort of on lease or whatever. I don't know. I think he's on a temporary contract, and probably if they do well, they'll sign him as the full-time coach.
No disrespect to Kangaroo Kenny either. He is a good coach. It's just a new roster that he's working with, and again, we haven't seen a lot of them working together.
And they were insane in North America at the very least. Obviously, it was them and Sonics, now Shopify Rebellion, as the top 2. They placed top 2. DarkZero only lost to Sonics. They lost their first game to Sonics. They lost the very last game of the stage to Sonics. But again, such a poor international performance. And if they hadn't made any roster changes, you might chalk it up to a fluke. But just after losing Canadian, arguably the greatest international player of all time, it just feels like that's not a coincidence. How do you feel about it, Kbomb?
Yeah, I have them in tier 3 as well. I think they have a solid core. I think I think Pamba and Bolo can be a really good entry duo. I like Nafe as the IGL maybe more than some people. I like NJR, one of the best support players in the world, but I'm not a huge fan of Kobe Luck yet. Maybe he can prove me wrong this event, but
Yeah.
I wanted to see them make a roster change and have a different 5th, but they ended up sticking with the same roster, so we'll see how it works out. But yeah, I definitely can't see them being ahead of tier 2 just with the international performance, and I honestly could see them potentially as a tier 4 team. But I think Kangaroo Kenny is a good coach, so we'll see how he does on DarkZero.
Yeah, pound for pound, player for player, this feels like one of the best teams in the world. Nafe, Bolo, NJR, Pamba, that's an insane four. Kobe Lax is really feeling like the weak link. This is his event to prove that that is not the case. That what we saw in, I guess, both North America and Montreal, he wasn't especially impressive in either. He had a few moments, but overall not great. This really is his event to prove it. If they don't do well here, I almost certainly have to imagine he gets dropped. But yeah, he needs to show up big. I think he does have the potential. There's a reason he was lauded as the biggest prospect coming out of T2 coming into the last stage when he got picked up. So I think they'll perform at least reasonably. I don't know if they'll go super far. If they do, I have to imagine a lot of that will be off the back of a big Kobe Lax boss up. I feel like tier 3 is probably appropriate for them. Next up, we have Liquid, the biggest chokers of all time, perhaps, maybe of all time. But they usually perform relatively well. They weren't spectacular at the last SI. They made it to, like top 12-ish. I think they got eliminated by G2. They were decent in their group, and then they just weren't great in bracket. They got like 1 win. But throughout the last year with Maya on the team, they've looked really, really good. One of the highest average placements, I think, of any team in the world. I think they're, I'll see what you guys think. Do you guys think they're a tier 1 or tier 2 team? I think some people might argue tier 1, but I think especially because of how many times people have had Liquid as an event favorite and they disappoint time and time again, I think we're going to have to see more from them before we put them there. But what do you think, Kbomb? What tier do they actually belong in?
Yeah, I really debated putting them in tier 1, but I can't justify it with the other 3 teams that are there and the performances they've had. I think Team Liquid is top of tier 2, but I don't think they're that tier 1 yet. I really like the roster they have right now, and they did very well in the last event, I believe. Top 4, if I'm remembering correctly.
I think you're right.
So yeah, I mean, and they looked really good. I think they lost to W7M, maybe it was BDS. One of those two. It looks like.
Did they not?
Huh?
Yeah. Is Manchester just like or Montreal just like lost from my mind? Did they not make it to? Yeah, they. Oh, where were
No, they
they?
did. They're at Montreal.
No, they were at Montreal, but they didn't make playoffs, right? They only made. Yeah, they lost.
That's correct. They did
in the
not
last.
make it to main stage.
They lost to Sonics. Yeah. So they didn't do so well there, but at Esports World Cup they made top 4, and they were also top 4 in Manchester. So only top
So it was the
top
last
11.
event.
So a little bit of a blip there, but back-to-back top 4s before that.
I think the last event then was a little bit of a fluke. Because I know they started off really hot in that Swiss stage, and then I guess they lost 3 best of 3s in a row. Maybe something chalked their mental there. But yeah, I still see them as a tier 2 team for sure, and they definitely have the potential to work their way into a tier 1 squad. Those are 3 good teams they lost to too. So
yeah, fair enough. They had some pretty solid losses, and I guess I just do not remember Montreal as well as Manchester for some reason. I keep getting them mixed up. The M names certainly don't help. So a little bit of a drop off in performance from the 2 events before that, but still, last round of Swiss isn't too terrible. Where do you think they belong, Tom?
It's time for my hot take. I have Liquid as a tier 3 team. I think they have choked far more than they should. Personally, I think Lagonis has not been playing very well in this meta. I don't think his style of support play has just been very strong. I don't think Resets has done anything incredibly notable this year. With Liquid, it really seems between Maya, Palu, and Nesk, you need 2 out of 3 of them to pop off for them to win a match. If that doesn't happen, they just can't pull it together. And yes, those are 3 incredibly talented players. Palu and Nesk have been in it since the beginning and have been phenomenal since the beginning. Maya, a little bit new of a talent, but still very strong. I just don't feel their mission statement almost has just been, all right, we haven't made a championship yet. Let's plug in a new star player and see if that works. Didn't work, cycle them out. New star player, cycle them out. New star player. They just haven't really made the adjustments and changes that they need to win a championship. And I'm putting them in tier 3 for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be fair, the tiers both represent they partially represent how likely we think it is for a team to win, but also sort of predict where we think they'll place. Like where do you think Liquid would place, Tom? Just like around where do you think they'll
I
place?
I think they would probably fall off outside of top 8. I
Okay.
think they
Yeah.
they make it out of groups, but they probably don't make it far out of there. And I think that's more of a testament to the strength of other teams at this event than Liquid's shortcomings overall. I think there are a lot of really strong rosters here, and I just think that those rosters would beat out Liquid most days of the week.
Yeah. And looking at this placement in particular right here, I kind of want to put Shopify above them. They just won the head to head. It was Sonics at the time, of course, but they eliminated Liquid from the event to make it into top 8. They didn't do anything in top 8, but they at least made it there over the likes of Liquid. And if you look at their chances in the event, these guys have Canadian, one of the most resolute players ever, and then these guys have Palu and Ness, the biggest chokers ever, and it's in NA. I kind of want to put these guys at least above, and then I don't know, like, does Liquid really belong above Furia? I guess Liquid might have only made it to the last round of Swiss, but they made it to the event. Furia didn't, so I do think Liquid could certainly be lower. I think let's leave it for the end. Let's get through these teams and then
Yeah.
we'll reevaluate. I definitely understand the argument to put them in
I
tier
think
three.
Liquid was the team who beat Furia in Montreal in the quarterfinals. I believe they beat them. Because Furia had won 3
Yeah,
events in a row. I'm pretty sure
think you're
Liquid
right.
was the team who eliminated them in that tournament. So I would maybe have Liquid ahead of them just for that. If we're
Okay.
going by the Sonics Liquid head-to-head thing, I
Well,
mean,
yeah, but I mean that was at the last event though,
that's
to be
true.
fair. But anyways, moving on to Secret, arguably the second best team in Europe. Probably most people would put them at number 2. I think you can maybe debate with Virtus.pro because of what we just saw at the last major. But anyways, one of the very best teams out of Europe. Europe, I think a region with a little bit more to prove than North America and Brazil in that people have been saying for some time that it is really BDS and then huge gap the rest of Europe. And then honestly, probably just a couple teams and then another huge gap. Some of the teams in Europe kind of suck, but that's true of most regions. The bottom of the region can't quite hang. Anyways, these guys have played the meta really well. They are maybe if you're a long time viewer of the game, but you haven't been keeping up recently, a lot of these names outside of maybe like Virtue, you might not think of as some of the top players, but Secret keeps showing up time and time again. They do pretty well at international events. They both qualify for and do fairly well. They've hit a little bit of a brick wall, and unfortunately that brick wall is BDS because they had to play BDS in the quarterfinals of both the last majors. So I feel like they're a pretty solid team. Maybe if their bracket looks a little bit different and they don't have to play BDS at a certain break point, then they can make a pretty deep run. What do you think, Kbomb?
I think I'd put them at the top of tier 3. I'd actually put them behind
Really?
VP. I think those two teams are very similar. I think VP actually, in my opinion, performed a little bit better at the last major. They made the semifinals. They lost in 3 maps to W7M, the team who BDS only took a map off them too in the grand finals. So I think VP did a little bit better than Secret in the last major, so I can't justify placing Secret ahead of VP. That being said,
Yeah, I mean, if you do really value what happened at the last event, then certainly VP placed higher than Secret, and they especially did better in that top 8. Virtus.pro eliminated in quarter or semifinals by the team that won the event, whereas Secret eliminated in the quarterfinals by the team that did not win. They at least made the grand final, but they didn't win. How do you feel about it, Tom?
I have to hard disagree. I think they're a very strong team and belong in tier 2. I think the success of Secret has been overshadowed by BDS, but Secret is, in my opinion, the opposite of what I was just saying about Liquid. None of these players are like top tier, carry their team, star players that have won titles and things like that, but they are all very well rounded, very strong players, and they're playing very well together. Their map pool is very strong. They've been very consistent. I think the only reason we're really not more excited about them is because there is one more European team that is even more powerful. But I think Secret have a very strong chance to make top 6, if not top 4, at this invitation.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more inclined to agree with Tom. I do think that they're more of a tier 2 team. I think people consider them as a team that plays the meta really well, as opposed to Virtus.pro, who just somehow they're timeless and they're always finding success in different
Right.
metas, even if they don't play it especially well. But Secret, they really have leveraged the sort of cheeseball meta that we exist in. I guess I haven't been watching very closely for the last little while since like the last major, so I don't know how Blackbeard has changed the equation for shield heavy teams. I can only imagine it has helped, but yeah, I feel like I feel like they belong in tier 2. That's why I'm gonna put them. I agree with Tom there. Then next up, top 4 team as far as the points that they earn. This is the team that won the Manchester Major. They were Beast Coast. They became Cloud9 Beast Coast, but then that team, whatever, they were subsumed. They were consumed by M80. That's why they decided to pick up Gunner and Diffuser. The other 3 are still on this team. Unwanted is what they're called. They're joined by Dream and Adam. So it's those 2 plus Spirits, Hot and Cold, and who am I blanking on?
Gavini?
And Gaveni,
Yep.
yeah, I don't know, I couldn't think of him. So it's those guys. Adam formerly played on the Sonics. Dream formerly played on Auction, so they are tier 1 experienced players. I listened to Spirits go on a Fiend Rant channel, and he seemed really confident. And I have to applaud him. I like Spirits as a person and as a player, and I want these guys to succeed, but it feels really tough. Sort of not quite last minute, but pretty late in the game, getting perhaps your 2 best players sort of rug pulled out from under you, having to pick up not bad players, but just having to pick up anyone to replace your star players is really difficult. I wonder if the roles will fit perfectly, because I don't know if that Adam and Dream necessarily slot right into the roles of Diffuser and Gunner. So a lot of the odds stacked against them. We haven't seen them. I mean, we haven't seen them at an international event since Manchester. They didn't make Esports World Cup. They didn't make Montreal. So a lot of reasons to be down on this team. But how do you guys feel about it? What do you think, Tom?
I think to add on to what you were saying, yeah, this team has been pillaged. A lot of their top tier talent was taken away. Also important to mention that their coach from Manchester, Fettuccini, is no longer with the team. I believe he's actually off working on some his college degree. So good for him. But
I think
this
he's a
team is
content
now
creator
actually
on M80 now.
Oh, really? That's interesting. I think this team's actually back in the same position that it was heading into that Manchester major. A lot of people don't have any expectations for this roster. Again, these guys aren't necessarily all stars that have carried teams before. Maybe actually I could probably pull that back. Hot and Cold has done some pretty amazing things. But I think this team has nothing to lose. They are unwanted, much like they were when they were Beast Coast and they showed up at Manchester before. They could make a run, but there's a lot of doubt, and for that reason, I'm putting them in the wild card team.
Yeah, fair enough. And this is where Mint is. This is the team that Mint joined.
Yes.
What do you think, Kbomb? Do they belong in tier 4 or another tier?
Yeah, this is a really tough call for me between tier 3 and tier 4. I had DarkZero, G2, and Unwanted all in my tier 3, whereas I had VP and M80 in tier 2. So probably had too many teams in tier 2. But so I don't know. It's really tough. But yeah, I think I would put them in maybe the top of tier 4, rather than tier 3, because yeah, we just losing their 2 best players so close to an event is just a really big deal. And I love Gavini. He's one of my favorite players. I would argue he was the 2nd best player on that team that won the major in Manchester. But I don't know. I don't think they have the roster to do as well. But they could turn things around for sure. They could This is the team that I mean, at least the core 3 have done it very recently. So they're able to pick up the pieces with their new additions. Then maybe they do make another miracle run like they did in Manchester.
Yeah, I agree. they pretty clearly fit the definition of a wild card. I think because of the circumstances that have befallen them, I don't think you can realistically put them above that. I could definitely see them putting in a solid performance, but again, I feel like they are sort of definitionally a wild card. So I'll put them there. I don't want to put them any lower than the top of that tier, but yeah, I could see them getting grouped, unfortunately. But on the other hand, I could see them putting in a reasonable run. I basically cannot see them winning the event or making like a super deep run, but like I could see a decent run out of these guys. Next up, we have, you'll notice the favorites tier is currently empty. We have W7M next up. They are I guess the third seed coming into the event, but they just won the most recent major. They were also the runner up at the big event before that, Esports World Cup. So, in a sense, you sort of objectively have to consider them the favorite, but let's see if you guys actually agree with that notion. Where do you put W7M at, Kbomb?
They're for sure a tier 1 team, and I think the debate would be between them and BDS for who is the actual number 1 favorite going into this. But they have to be tier 1. They have to be top 2 in my opinion. As objectively looking at it, one of those two teams should win, but anything can happen. But the way they played in Montreal, they looked unstoppable, and very, very good tournament for them. They really put it together with Volps on that roster, and I think they're a, if not the favorite at this event.
Yeah, they looked incredible. I think especially the fashion in which they beat BDS. They didn't just barely squeak it out. It was pretty dominant. They did lose one map, but still 3-1 over the likes of BDS is a monumental task, especially with sort of how poor their record was against BDS coming into the event. So yeah, I think pretty clearly they are one of the favorites, but do you think they are the favorite, Tom?
I make a strong case for them to be the favorite, and not to talk about the other teams too much, but FaZe and BDS have a choking problem. W7M has made top 4, if not top 2 consistently. Also, props to the W7M org, because they also created the roster that is now Furia, and now they have a new roster that is on top of the world. I really love Loban. I really love Dodes, which is a newer talent they've added on. Volps has been phenomenal with this roster. I think overall they're just really strong, really cohesive, and they've pulled it off against some of the other top teams that I have a feeling are going to put in this favorite tier.
Yeah, I think anybody who knows what's going on knows that the other two teams are also going to be in this favorites tier. I think we'll discuss the debate when we get to BDS a little bit more. W7M, yes, they won the most recent event. They lost the event before that to BDS. You probably value that one less because it's older, and also that's the non-official. It's not the official Ubisoft Blast event. It's the Saudi tournament. But they did fail to qualify for Manchester, so that's a little bit of a knock against them. BDS were in the grand finals of that event, while W7M were not even there. And yes, it was a little bit ago. That's 3 events back, but still, back-to-back grand finals for BDS. But we have another team to discuss before we continue talking about BDS. How are we feeling? Well, okay, let me introduce them. This feels a little bit disrespectful. FaZe are the runners-up of the most recent Invitational. They probably should have won. They're up like 6-1 on map number 5. They just need to close out a single round. But instead, then W7M, now Furia, won 7 rounds in a row to clinch the title, to complete the dream run of major into Six Invitational victory. Perhaps the biggest heartbreak of all time, perhaps the biggest choke of all time, one of the greatest esports matches of all time. Twin brothers on either team, on either side. And they've also been pretty good this year as well. They haven't made it to a grand final like W7M, Beast Coast, and BDS have since SI, but they've still been very respectable. Where are we putting them, Tom?
I'm definitely tier 1. I think FaZe, I really should have done some research on this before I make this claim, but I believe FaZe has made second place at international events more than any other org. I think they will make a run to the top. I think so, because they were second in Invitational. They were second in the German major way back in the day against Berlin. I believe they were second in one of the majors last year, or they were at least they've made main stage so many times, and they have just not really pulled it together for as often as they are getting there. They should have won more events than they have, considering their previous success. They're absolutely a favorite. They belong in this top tier, but I don't necessarily think they are the favorite.
I think it's just the two events where they made second place, but still, yeah, they've made a ton of top 8, top 4s. Did you have something else to add?
I mean, it kind of is crazy to say that though, because they just play lights out Siege. When they all push together very, very well. Their attacks are very strong. They are cohesive as a unit. Any one of their players can pop off and be the number one in any lobby. They're not dependent on one person for a carry in any sense. They really just are an incredible Siege roster.
Yeah, I think it made even more impressive to speak to that point that recently it's felt like KDS and Vidiking were their, like, statistically best players, their most impactful players, when historically it's been generally the other three. It's been Handy, Cyber, and Souls that were the big statistical players, with the other two a little bit behind. But in the last stage in Montreal, those were like definitely their two standout players. So yeah, they have the depth, they have the skill, they have the cohesion as a team. They made top 4 in Montreal, they made top 8 in Esports World Cup, they made top 8 in Manchester. Before that, second place at Invitational, top 4 in Atlanta, top 4 in Copenhagen. Like, that's just so many back to back, not just top 8s, but like several top 4s, just crazy stuff for them. Where do you see them, Kbomb?
Yeah, I think they're tier 5. The rest, I don't see them making it.
Okay.
But no, I'm just kidding. But I definitely think
Cyclops though.
they're the only team in the favorites category. I think it's pretty obvious BDS is going to be there, that you can make a case for being in tier 2. I would still have them in tier 1 just because of how good they always are. They're so consistent at being good, but they just never win. So I think I'd put them in tier 1 as one of the favorites.
Yeah, I think it's very clear, and I'm just gonna, well, I won't do it. They're gonna go in tier 1. I think almost anybody you ask that knows what they're talking about is going to have W7M, FaZe, and BDS as the 3 favorites. Like, that they would say there is a very large chance that one of those 3 will be the winner of the event. But Siege does very, very often have surprises. It's pretty rare, honestly, that the favorite goes on to win the event. We had the sort of G2 era and the W7M era, but besides that, it's like always just a different winner. So we'll see if any other dynasties are getting established. Like, if we see another BDS versus W7M grand final, that would be crazy. That'd be 3 in a row. Okay, but let's move on to BDS. We have talked about them a little bit, but let's talk about them a little bit more. Where do they slot in? So if currently we have W7M here at 1 and FaZe here at 2, are they taking the number 1 spot? Are they number 2? Are they somehow number 3? I think, spoiler, they're obviously going to be number 1 or 2. But yeah, where are they going to slot in, Kbomb? What's your final call on BDS?
I think I have to put him at number 2 overall. I think the way W7M looked in that last event, and the way I think they're my favorite. I'm not gonna fault you if you have BDS as your favorite. This team with, Shaiko, and they've been a phenomenal team this whole year, really. Second twice in a row, but they just fall short in the finals. But it's not like they got blown away both times. They won a map. They're there because they earned it. They just can't get over that final hump. Is this the time they can do it? It would be kind of poetic, I think. Second place twice in a row, and they win SI. I can see it, but I think W7M is the team to beat right now.
Yeah, W7M obviously won the last event. BDS three grand finals though in a row, so you have to give them credit there. BDS historically hasn't been the greatest SI team. I think their best performance was actually their debut SI in 2020 when they slid RXWD. I think they were 3rd or 4th. I think 4th. I want to say TSM was 3rd place at that event. They haven't lived up to that. They've gotten like right around top 8 like every time. They weren't at the last SI. That's also another factor. They sort of just narrowly missed out. They were having sort of a tough year in terms of getting points, and then they didn't quite qualify. And so they missed out. W7M, they also didn't have a a spectacular SI. Well, the team that they were back then. Obviously, W7M, the organization, did win the last SI, but that wasn't this team that we're talking about. So the debate rages on. Do you have an answer for us, Tom? Who's number one?
So I think I said earlier that I think W7M is my number one, and I think that's because of the more recent success. But I have to say, BDS is the most terrifying roster in Siege right now. I think Shaiko is almost undebatably the best fragger in the world right now. I think there's an argument that Yuzus, who's also on this roster, belongs in the top 5 for fraggers. Bride used to be the plant master, used to be renowned as this amazing support. Now the round is over before he can get the plant down because the rest of his team is doing so incredibly well. Um, Ever since Yuzus and Solitov joined BDS from the M&M roster at the end of last year, or technically beginning of 2024, but end of that season, this roster has been terrifying. They've been dominant in Europe, which has been a pretty strong region in the past, and they have been dominant in events. They've made second place at both majors this year. But because they've just been stuck on that second place and watching those main stage events, it almost seems like Shaiko just gets a little bit of stage fright almost, which is so wild to say. If that is something that BDS can overcome, if they can keep their mental intact, then there is nothing stopping them from going all the way for invite.
Yeah, I still think that, like, on paper, this is the best roster in the world. Obviously, they failed to get across the line in both official majors this year. They won, they're the overlords of Saudi. Like, Bride and Shaiko own Saudi Arabia. But, if you value that less, which some people might not, then then they are a little bit of chokesters. They do have a major win a little while back in Jönköping, so that's at least something. That was before they had Yuzus and Solitov. But again, I think that, like, on paper, player for player, pound for pound, they are the scariest, best team in the world. But W7M, they put it together as an actual team, better than BDS did at the last major. So if both of you guys say that they're number one, I guess I'll go with it. I don't have to put too much brain power into it. Even if I thought BDS was number one, I have been overruled. So I think this is a perfectly fair thing to go with. And I just want to say, you say Shaiko's one of the best fraggers in the world right now. I don't know that that's necessarily even true. Or if it is, it's not as clear as it was. I think Shaiko is probably the best fragger of all time, but he's a little bit overshadowed these days because, as you also say, he has been getting a little bit nervous in some of these important games. It seems like hadn't showed up like the Shaiko of old. You do have the likes of Yuzus and Leakafak and the rest of the team to potentially show up, but we have seen them disappear enough of them in important games for it to really hurt them. So yeah, I think I'm pretty happy with this list. I don't want to go through each team again, but is there any placement that really stands out to either of you guys that you want to argue somebody should go up or down?
If I had to pick one, I would make an argument that Liquid should get bumped down. That would be my one change to this list.
It does look a little bit more attractive not having the middle tier being the least populated one. How about you, Kbomb? What changes would you make?
I don't know. I still like G2 and tier 3. I'm still on the fence about Unwanted, whether they should be in tier 3 as well. I'm on the fence about Virtus.pro. Maybe they should be in tier 2. Maybe even M80 should be in tier 2. Those are probably my biggest things. I don't think you can change anything with tier 1.
Yeah, tier
And
1's
I think
locked.
tier 5 is pretty solid as well.
Yeah, I disagree about
tiers
G2. I feel like their international performances have been so bad. I can't put them any higher. How do you guys feel about this? How about Joel above Razza? Does this make sense to you guys? These guys
I wasn't too fussed about the order
Yeah.
within each tier.
Okay, well, that was just something I noticed as we're going through it. But yeah, I feel pretty good about this. Virtus.pro, I could almost feel going into two, but yeah, 2 feels really populated. I mean, I don't know. Do you like this, Kbomb? Do you like Liquid down?
I think Liquid's a solid tier 2 team. And I think if anybody moves down from tier 2, it's Secret, in my opinion. If we're gonna keep Virtus.pro on tier 3,
It's a tough
I
one
knew he'd
because
say it. I knew he'd say it.
that's just how I'm thinking about it. I mean, Liquid on tier 3. I mean, I guess if that's what you guys think, but
I don't know.
I think they should be ahead of Furia, in my opinion.
I think I'll leave Liquid in tier 2. The order I'm like very unsure of in tier 2, but I think this is good enough. But notably though, Secret and Liquid, two teams we're talking, or rather Furia and Liquid, two teams we're talking about. Neither of these guys made it to top 8 of last event. The other 3 did. That's something to be noted. Furia didn't even make it to the last event. I think we'll go with this. I think we already had our discussion on where everything should go. Let's not go back on it too much now. I think this looks good enough. Like there are a few changes that I could definitely see, but I think this is good enough.
Lock it in.
Alrighty.
Maybe
yeah.
switch Cyclops and FaZe.
Oh. Well, we'll see about that. They're in the same group, so we'll get to see if Kbomb gets his justice there. Yeah, that's gonna do it for us in this video. This ended up being longer than I'd hoped, but that's the nature of the beast when you want to give it more than surface level analysis on 20 teams. So alrighty, that's gonna do it for us. Catch you guys next time.